What would you call a soldier from Pennsylvania Steel Country who operates rolling steel, a guy who leads Armored Brigade combat teams into battle against Cobra, and a guy who celebrated at Forbes Field and then Three Rivers Stadium with the rest of Steeler Nation? You'd call him Steeler, of course. Let's talk about him. Ralph Pulaski was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and according to his file card, Ralph grew up in a blue-collar, middle-class family. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and was able to put himself through college on a ROTC scholarship. He was studying full-time and keeping a job operating heavy equipment on the side to bolster what he got from his scholarship stipend. To fulfill the requirements of that scholarship, Ralph joined the United States Army, where he went through training, graduating top of his class at Fort Knox's Armor School, and became cadre for an experimental armored fighting vehicle project at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Lieutenant Pulaski also graduated artillery school at Fort Sill, desert exercise at Fort Hood, and covert ops school in Langley, Virginia. He qualified on all NATO and Warsaw Pact weapons and AFVs, but favors the M16, MAC-10, and his M1911. Pulaski's Impel trading card says that Steeler appears to be quiet and easygoing, but that he's a raging, furious fighter on the inside. That you can't rely on him to give an objective account of events, but you can rely on him to get the job done. Major Al Milgram from US AMC did Steeler's psych profile, and in that file, the Major notes that Pulaski is either the most normal, well-adjusted man in the world or the best disguised psychotic. There's something seething beneath the surface, and he goes on to regard their interaction at Fort Leonard Wood. It wasn't long after this when a special rapid response force called G.I. Joe rolled out a new motorized multi-ordnance battle tank, dubbed the MOBAT, which would need a new tank commander and tank crew to operate. In G.I. Joe Declassified, Steeler revealed how he went from U.S. Army to G.I. Joe. After rolling into Fort Wadsworth Motor Pool in that issue with Flash and crossing paths with Sergeant Jody Shooter Craig, they met up with some Joes in the command center just as word came in that Alpha Team's cover had been blown down in Sierra Gordo and the stalker was carrying a wounded prisoner to the evac site. Steeler said he'd been in that situation before, and he told the tale of how he was recruited. He was on a peacekeeping mission in Trucial Abysmia, rolling a tank as part of what was supposed to be a simple convoy run. But they were ambushed by an army belonging to a local warlord, and as fire and hot lead rained down on the supply convoy, Steeler's tank was destroyed. In a moment of anger mixed with bravery, Steeler jumped on top of his destroyed tank and gunned the local army down with the Ma-Deuce atop the turret. After that enemy fire went silent, Steeler managed to pull his gunner out of the tank, but sadly his loader and driver were KIA. The radio was knocked out too, so Steeler had to carry his gunner 10 clicks through a sandstorm to a French paratroop compound for help. And it turns out that it was Sparks who recommended Steeler to General Flagg for G.I. Joe. He was taken on to the G.I. Joe team and given the codename Steeler. And when not out in the field, Steeler commands the Joe's garage and motor pool and serves as XO for the Joe's tank division. He frequently puts the armored cavalry and heavy weapons through its paces, participating and overseeing R&D and upgrades like the Mauler MBTX and Armadillo mini-tank that was part Tankette, part M50 Ontos, as well as overseeing NCO cold weather training out at Fort Carson in Colorado. Speaking of the MOBAT tank's design was based on an experimental USA-Germany joint project from the Cold War called MBT-70. It was meant to replace the M60 Patton and be an answer to the Warsaw Pact's T-55 replacement T-62 tanks. But after going significantly over budget, that project was eventually shelved. However, advancements made during the life of the project were directly applied to future projects, like that of the M1 Abrams and Leopard 2 tanks. But in G.I. Joe lore, this was not truly shelved, and led to the development of the MOBAT tank, which came armed with a 130mm main cannon along with a 50 cal MG. Steeler was also given special equipment like his headset, which is part helmet, binocular, comms, and a camera all in one, complete with an IR lens and zoom capabilities along with a shutter operation for the camera functionality. This was in the early days of G.I. Joe, and thus Steeler became one of the very first G.I. Joes. In DDP and Brandon Jerwood's Snake Eyes Declassified, it's revealed that not only was Steeler there for the first days of the new team, but he was the one whom Scarlet had just laid out on the training mat when Snake Eyes laid eyes upon her for the first time. It's the same issue that revealed Steeler was on one of the Hueys when Snake Eyes had his tragic accident. So now part of the Joes, he was already causing problems as he and Flash were trying to throw their weight around with the chaplain's assistants in the Fort Wadsworth canteen. But this downtime on base would be cut short when the team was called in to rescue a lady named Dr. Adele Burkhart from Cobra Commander's terrorist organization, Cobra. When team showed up to the G.I. Joe command center, it was Steeler who was running the hydraulic lift down to the sublevels where the briefing was to be held. For that mission, Steeler was part of the second wave deployed to Cobra's island. Hawk, Grand Slam, Rock and Roll, Zap, Clutch, and Steeler assaulted the Cobra stronghold, making a beach landing via LCT, landing craft tank, while Short Fuse, Grunt, and Stalker dumped mortars and laid down cover fire on the airfield as a distraction. Steeler was in his tank with Hawk and Zap, and they rolled right over the Cobra troopers' concertina wire. Further inland on the road to the fort, Steeler knocked out 2 Cobra tanks with some well-placed Sabo rounds, then blasted the front gate of the Cobra fort just before a Cobra trooper shot a rocket at the tank's radiator and immobilized it. They hitched a ride with Clutch and Grand Slam to continue pressing forward. Steeler then joined the main assault force and breached an inner chamber of the fort to rescue Dr. Burkhart from Cobra Commander and Baroness. In issue 3, he worked with Clutch to dismantle a captured Cobra battle robot. They brought the disassembled robot back to the pit, but Cobra activated it, and he was stuck down in the pit with a killer machine. After the blast door to the canteen slammed shut, Clutch ripped off his shirt and deadlifted the armbar counterweight up to open the door for them, saying it was like replacing a bogey wheel on a tank in the field. It was touch and go for a while, but they managed to stop the robot and escape. Steeler and his MOBAT were the stars of issue 5, entitled Tanks for the Memories. Steeler, Clutch, and Breaker were showing Scarlet around the tank while they cleaned her. The tank, that is, not Scarlet. Steeler then explained that General Flagg wanted to roll the MOBAT right past the Joint Chiefs during a parade to see if they could pick out the sophisticated, upgraded tank amongst the other standard models. They were put in between a Nautilus float and a drum and bugle corps, which was great for Steeler because he could zoom in on the majorettes to keep abreast of the rear guard. But this was a trap. That Nautilus float ended up being a cargo hold, and the drum corps were Cobra troopers, so Steeler and his MOBAT crew had to bug out of there like Dom Toretto in a drift car. MOBAT got stuck in traffic, so Clutch took them onto the sidewalk with Steeler hanging onto the sides of the cupola hatch like it was a pair of oh shit handles, while Breaker blasted eardrums with the tank's PA system. They buttoned up and hid at the bottom of a lake, and in the fight in Central Park when they emerged, it was Breaker and his PA system with Steeler yelling at them to stand down that subdued the weapons-wielding drum troopers. They took the tank to the grandstand where the Joint Chiefs were. Clutch had Steeler and Breaker jump off the now dirtied tank so Clutch could ram the seats, revealing Cobra Commander hiding below. Steeler was then on the mission to the Hindu Kush to recover a downed Soviet spy plane, and for that mission he was tasked with driving the RTV, rough terrain vehicle. Steeler and Flash then used the RTV to fire on the October Guard's positions just before being all captured by Cobra, but they were able to get themselves out of that situation. Their next mission took Steeler and his MOBAT to Kennedy Space Center in Florida to protect the launch complex from Cobra attack. Steeler and Grunt were in the MOBAT towing a missile launcher as part of the outer defense ring. They were in position in some tall grass when Cobra attacked with their Sea Legs units. They managed to take some out and hold the ground forces off, but a land torpedo took out the MOBAT's armaments. Luckily, Zap and Short Fuse were nearby to launch some rockets at the Cobra elements, closing in on the stranded tank. Later, during the pipeline ploy mission in the Alaskan tundra, the MOBAT tank was hit, so Steeler, Grand Slam, and Short Fuse were injured. Doc had to treat them, and then he was a part of the Chokolosky, Florida Everglades operation as they followed a lead that led them to Zartan's lair and to Cobra Commander. We see him make landfall when Steeler takes the tank through a moving freight train, nearly running over a local police unit. The tank was the land element for the three-pronged attack. They were detected by Cobra Commander and Firefly inside of Zartan's lair, so he called in Destro and his Rattlers for air support. Steeler's tank, whose crew also included Clutch and Breaker, were now being chased by the chief in his squad car, which was now Sans door, thanks to the tank's armored side skirts. Their chase was halted when their path was blocked by a heavily armed Cobra robot army that Cobra Commander had risen up from the murky depths of the swamp. Between the tank's deadly accuracy and the police chief's double-barreled shotgun, they managed to hold off the Cobra robots, but there were so many, so Duke had Cutter divert the whale off course for help. To make it worse, Destro just entered the airspace with his Rattler, essentially a warthog designed for devastating the ground and anything in its line of fire, especially effective for throwing 30mm lead at 3,900 rounds per minute at a tank to punch holes in it. Destro swooped in on a low strafing run, and as he was banking around to turn in on target a second time, Steeler had them park the tank under a tree next to a stream so they could toss water on the engine to cool it down enough to trick Destro's IR array. And just after Destro got tone on the tank, it blipped off his targeting screen. The whale showed up, shot up the Rattler, which in turn shot up the whale and her crew just before Destro was forced to punch out of his jet. Steeler's tank crew was then able to treat the wounded atop the hovercraft, while Breaker drove the tank and towed them to the coastline. A couple issues later, Steeler of the Joes rolled an armored column from New York over a channel bridge to New Jersey to counter-assault McGuire Air Base, which is now under attack by Cobra and the Dreadnoks. After chasing off the Noks, Steeler took the tank to attack Cobra Commander's own HISS tank, which was currently attacking the control tower with its main cannon. A well-aimed shot hit the Cobra tank broadside and ripped a nasty gash in the hull, just as CoverGirl's Wolverine, an APC, and a Vamp rolled up alongside replied Steeler. Cobra had attacked McGuire because they thought it was the secret Joe base they'd been looking for, but when the armored column, with Steeler and his tank on point, rolled through a neighborhood and back to Fort Wadsworth, Fred Broca saw them and radioed that intel to Cobra Commander. When Sergeant Slaughter showed up for the first time, it was Steeler who opened the door to release Sergeant Slaughter and a beehive of angry Joes from the motor pool garage, after Zartan, whom they thought was Ripcord, had escaped. And so, for the Ripcord rescue mission to Cobra-controlled Springfield, Steeler was assigned to the security team, tasked with coordinating with the strike team to take down the airport and all points of ingress and egress, and they did that by setting cars on fire to block the roads. Later back on base, Steeler was wrenching around in the garage with heavy metal when Hawk showed up to tell the Joes that the program was suspended due to the fiasco that was the Springfield rescue operation. Months later, Steeler was with Hawk, Crankcase, Clutch, Grand Slam, Thunder, Tunnel Rat, and Dusty somewhere in central Utah testing their new strategic long-range artillery machine, SLAM. And because Steeler was not part of the Cobra Civil War event, he was not arrested and thus was able to join Bazooka, Barbecue, Flash, Snowjob, Steeler, Roadblock, Dr. Burkhart, Rock and Roll, Grunt, Jinx, and Billy to rescue Generals Hawk and Hollingsworth from a hospital where they were being held by General Malthus and Cobra. To coordinate CQB and in an effort to keep Crossfire in check, Steeler would be on flank security. Immediately after Lightfoot, Budo, and Repeater made it through the final evolution of training, an incident broke out at nearby Picatinny Proving Ground, so Duke and Zap ordered them to kit up and load onto a Tomahawk, which already had the likes of Steeler, Grand Slam, and CoverGirl on board. Much later, and for his last Marvel-era AR-AH story, Steeler was in issue 114, where he was in Benzene City in the Emirate of Benzene battling Cobra Hiss tanks in the desert. This time, though, he was in a pulverizer tank. Some Joes were in a Hammer, while Hot Seat was in a Raider. They were trying to capture some ground and protect the flank of the main force. And in the Benzene town square, they ran into Metalhead, who would shoot and scoot, making it hard for the Joes to come up with a firing solution. Metalhead took out Steeler's pulverizer, so he dismounted, and now with nose bleeding and ears ringing from the blast, the Hammer guys offered him a ride, but he, still ribbing them, said he preferred to hitch a ride on the much more thickly armored Raider. At a town square full of Dragon's Teeth tank obstacles, Steeler had Hot Seat take the Raider right up over the top of them, the thick wide treads allowing them to traverse without falling. But the Hammer was blocked, and Metalhead took it out with another rocket. Metalhead then dropped the building on the Raider and blew up the tank treads, which also set the Raider on fire and trapped Steeler and Hot Seat inside the cockpit since the canopy was jammed shut now. Dusty, Salvo, and Metalhead were about to take each other out, but Steeler managed to get the canopy open just in time to cease and stand down. Much later, Steeler showed up in the cover of issue 173, along with Wildcard Cross Country. They were back in Benzene in a deserted town, they thought, now driving an M1 Abrams main battle tank. This was a military operation in urban terrain, and being so exposed, especially at intersections, worried Steeler, and he said they should dig in and button up instead of rolling around exposed. CoverGirl agreed, citing no Tusk upgrade, most notably no slat or reactive armor upgrades, and no shielding for commander and loader stations, so they'd be overly exposed when out of the hatch trying to get more situational awareness. And to that point, Cross Country said he was feeling naked up there. 3 streets over, the October Guard were in a Russian tank. They hid in an alley and ended up pretty much right on top of each other, both their main guns ready to fire at point-blank range, and then boom, they did. They both fired, and each tank was hit with paint. These were paint marker rounds, and this whole thing was a test to see who Benzene would sign a purchase order with. But no contract was awarded because the situation was deteriorating rapidly in Benzene. Armored protesters were rising up in the streets, soon to be supported by a heavily armored column of Trucial-Abysmian Cobra surplus weaponry. Steeler and the Abrams crew offered to work with the October Guard to make the situation more dire. It turns out that the town wasn't actually deserted. People had nowhere to go, so they were hiding while the tanks were sparring. That pretty much guaranteed that they would stay and fight to protect those civilians from the incoming invasion force, which included late model Hiss 4 and Hiss 5 tank variants. The Abrams lined up on the column, now stalled by piles of car frames and burning bonfires, and took out the command vehicle with a well-placed sabot round that penetrated and detonated the stowed ordnance inside, ripping open the tank like a peeled sardine can. Steeler whipped that beast, that whispering death through the streets, with Cross Country loading and discarding sabots so CoverGirl could fire, and indeed she did. As they made their way to the fallback point, CoverGirl managed to take out 3 Hiss tanks with one shot. Steeler drove through a building, then they were found and surrounded, so Steeler rammed a couple Hiss tanks while Cross Country loaded in a uranium super penetrator. CoverGirl had the perfect firing solution, with help from her LRP and FCS, and she fired, taking out 3 more Hiss tanks with that one deadly round. When the October Guard's T-90s showed up on fire, Cross Country let them all know that a reinforced battalion of Hiss and Maggot tanks were inbound. They were ready to batten down the hatches and have their last stand at the OK Corral. But at the last minute, their adversaries stood down and did a 180, much to their confusion and their relief. During the Bob Graves rescue op in Sierra Gordo, Cobra Commander used the opportunity of all the Joes being off base to take over the pit, but a few Joes, like Snake Eyes and Scarlet, ran them out. So later, back at the pit, CoverGirl, driving an APC, showed up with a ton of Joes like Armadillo, Steeler, Grand Slam, Steamroller, and Long Range, called in by Joe Colton for his support. He said these were Joe drivers and they had been on assignments at other bases, so that's why Steeler has been away for a while. They rolled out all their heavy weapons to pursue Cobra's retreating forces. Just after this, Steeler was back at Fort Wadsworth helping to rebuild the motor pool, even though the chaplain's assistant school had been closed down. A couple soldiers from the engineer detachment pulled up in a Hummer to help them get the lights back on and noticed a plaque inside listing some KIA Joes. Steeler quickly picked up a cloth and said, "Our mistake, we should have cleaned this first." Steeler helped clean up the base and was later working in the garage with Clutch when Sean Collins showed up in his dress uniform saying he was reassigned, or so he thought. He was actually taken to the pit out west and given the codename Throwdown for his new duty assignment. This was just as the Joes were testing a new mech unit, and for that test, Steeler was there too, and he was one of the Joes remotely controlling an older model decommissioned MOBAT tank. The mech made quick work of the machines, with Steeler the only one to get a lock and an AP shut off before the MOBAT was turtled and burned to a charred husk. It was a disastrous exercise where Throwdown was injured and Snake Eyes lost his life, so the Joes decided to seal up the secret area of the pit, and to do so, Steeler toll booth cross country with a cement truck dumped tons of cement into the elevator shaft. Later, after Throwdown was captured by Cobra and Laura 343, a rescue op was put in motion, so Steeler was in the garage with the others making sure that the vehicles and equipment were in fighting shape and loaded up with ammo and equipment. Steeler rolled an AFV up to the surface, which is when Wild Bill said that they'd borrowed a contingent of C-130s from the Utah Air National Guard. But when the mission was officially called off and the Guard RTB'd, instead of loading them onto the Hercs, Steeler put the Mauler onto a transport vehicle and drove the transport vehicle and a column of Joe big rigs and buses to Springfield. In front of the Springfield Community Center, as a firefight broke out, Steeler managed to offload his MBT and fire round after round into the surrounding Cobra lines, devastating their tanks and troops with its firepower. They left town and Steeler went back to working in the pit's garage. During the Devil's Due era, Steeler was called back up to active duty during the war against Serpentor on Cobra Island. And then in the pre-Homoverse IDW continuity, Steeler was revealed to be a deep cover sleeper agent for Cobra. He was working for Major Blood and assassinated a couple Joes before himself being killed by a Cobra agent named Blacklight. And then, voiced by Chris Latta, Steeler appeared in a few episodes of the Sunbow era G.I. Joe A Real American Hero animated series, firstly the Mass Device 5-part event early on. He then showed up a lot driving his tank or up on Space Station Delta or on guard duty at the pit, but by and large he said nothing. His standout role was in a 2-part story called Worlds Without End, where he was not in his MOBAT tank but in another tank called the MBT Mauler. Marty Pasco's Worlds Without End was meant to explore the seemingly never-ending conflict, lasting effects that a war without end can bring, wounds both seen and unseen. And so in the 2 episodes, Cobra stole a matter transmuter. Steeler in an MBT Mauler was with some Joes when he told Lady J and the Armadillo that being a Joe was ruining his life, but she told him to suck it up, that they'd all had to make sacrifices. And they raided to some dreadnoughts and a Stinger and pursued them through the forest. Steeler crushed their Stinger with his tank by driving over it, but then Zartan used the Stinger's rockets to destroy Steeler's tank. Steeler ended up getting away with the transmuter blueprints. Later, inside a Cutter's whale, Steeler told Clutch, Barbecue, and Footloose that he was quitting the team. When Duke and LJ were shoved out of a moving train, it was the whale crew who climbed the train bridge trestle to save them. Copperhead then showed up and tried to pull Steeler off the bridge to get the blueprints he was still holding, and that caused the matter transmuter itself to go off, destroying the bridge and knocking out the Joes. And when they awoke, they were in an alternate reality. Then a strange bug bit Steeler on his neck just before Cobra glided in and attacked them from the air. Steeler fell down, already feeling ill from the bug bite, so Barbecue helped him to his feet. And they found an old Awe Striker, then some bikes, as Steeler was getting progressively worse. This whole thing was a lesson that the fight, though seemingly never ending and with neither side getting the upper hand, was better than letting evil win and taking over. That their fight really did mean something. Steeler, though, was ill and became delirious, saying they were dead and in the afterlife, and he ran away. And then on a monitor, Baroness and a female Viper named Layla ended up seeing him. Steeler stumbled outside and collapsed in the forest, and Grunt tried to help him, but he got up and ran, and Grunt had to chase Steeler. Baroness had Viper Layla go recover Steeler and bring him to her. They ended up finding some remains of G.I. Joes, even finding their own skeletons. Layla then showed up and took them back to the Baroness for medical treatment, and it turns out in this reality, Steeler and the Baroness were a couple, and she thought this was her love returned. She believed the alt-reality story when she realized her Steeler had a tattoo on the right arm, but this Steeler's tat was on the left forearm. At the end, Steeler decided to stay with the Baroness, and Grunt and Clutch stayed with them too. And that was it for Steeler. On the action figure side, Steeler debuted his straight arm V1 figure in 82 but got the swivel arm shortly thereafter. In 04, Steeler came in a 3-pack with General Flagon and Cobra Officer along with a comic book, and then in 2007 was included in the Tanks for the Memories 2-pack. In 2008, he came in another box set. That same year, Steeler was included in the Target exclusive Ultimate Battle Pack box set. In 2013, another Steeler was released by the G.I. Joe Collectors Club, which was the Night Force Artillery Commander version. And then in 2015 was part of the 50th anniversary Crimson Strike set, exclusive to San Diego Comic-Con, where he drove the Joe's version of the HISS tank called the G.I. Joe Chimera. And with that, that's a wrap on this one, my friends.